Welcome to Learning Aloud, a podcast from the Organizational Dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania, produced to inspire purposeful leadership practice and transform organizational experience. I am your host, Zach Davis. Joining us today in our virtual Zoom studio is Jake Stern, Director of Football Operations here at the University of Pennsylvania. In his current role, Jake manages the day-to-day operations and logistics of the football program. He began his career as a student assistant, working with the football team at the University of Michigan, and then worked for a year with the Fordham University football team before arriving at Penn in 2014. Jake grew up near the beach in New York and enjoys spending time outdoors when he's not focused on Quaker football. Jake's an alum of our Organizational Dynamics program here at Penn and incorporated his passion for football into his master's thesis. Jake, thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So, Director of Football Operations. From the description, it sounds like you wear many hats. Walk us through a day in the life. What's the best part of your job?
Yeah, so certainly wear many hats, like you alluded to. The best part of my job is there's really nothing like football game day. It's an amazing reward each week. In the fall, we really have to working hard all year to make it happen. But the best part has to be dealing with the student athletes. I'm going into year 7 now, so I've seen the full cycle of meet a family when a kid's a junior in high school, and then you show them around campus. You give them tours, you recruit them, then finally they want to come and they want to join the team, which is a great feeling. And then you help them through class scheduling, through the whole cycle. You see them as a scout team player, and then they get in the game, they start, and then they graduate, and now they're making money and coming back as alumni. So that full cycle of working with the student athletes is certainly the best part. For the day-to-day, a great analogy I once heard is kind of that of a goalie. I don't know if that makes sense, but in the early morning, I kind of catch up on emails and address things that were left over from the day before. And then, of course, there's tasks leading up to each game. But after those tasks, and really for the majority of the year, I act as a liaison to our program and the main contact for everyone outside of our office. And it's really waiting and being ready to react and to any number of things that come up.
Okay, that's where that goalie analogy comes in. You kind of
exactly.
Wait and see what comes at you.
Yeah, it's hard to predict the day to day, and kind of things pop up and then dealing with them as they do. So,
what's one thing that people might be surprised that you do or that you get involved in as the director of operations?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it'll be surprising, but like you alluded to before, the operations role at a small team certainly includes wearing many hats. One thing I really love about that role is I have my hand in nearly everything we do. So with that, if we're going to go back to surprising, I do high-level budget tracking and executing purchasing and hotel contracts and admissions and financial aid. But then there's like stuffing and mailing, envelopes for recruiting flyers and going down to the locker room and stocking the fridge with protein shakes. I've served food at team meals. I've wired headsets before games. I've held chains at practice. There's really nothing that I have not done. And it's all in the names of, because it has to be done.
That's great. So, and it points to what you said. I mean, nothing like game day, right? And it sounds like you're anywhere from. I guess the only thing you're not doing on the game is taking the snap under center. I mean, it sounds
absolutely. No, game day is the best because once kickoff comes, my work at that point is done, and then it's being on the sideline and helping out in any way.
Oh, that's great. So, I imagine that it's got to be definitely challenging right now. I mean, back in July, the Ivy League made the difficult decision to suspend fall sports for the 2020 season. How did this impact the football team?
Yeah, it's been really tough. First, I feel terrible for our seniors. They're kind of in limbo. Very few at our level continue playing into the pros and continue their careers. So I'm a little worried that, some of them may not get that clean closure to their athletic careers. And it's tough not to have that contact. It's almost unfathomable to think that I haven't really seen our players in person for now almost 9 months now.
Hmm.
But things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, we have been great. We've, been able to stay in touch with each other. I think structure is huge for the players. Our coaches have really done an awesome job keeping in touch and keeping them engaged. And even in non-football meetings and just regular conversations about life, we've been allowed to have football meetings since September. We brought in some guest speakers to full team meetings. We've been able to do some virtual conditioning stuff and rec classes to keep them active. And it really comes down to just generally encouraging and reminding and, every step of the way to stay safe and stay smart, but to keep in touch with each other and support each other and get through a difficult but shared experience together.
Yeah, it sounds great. How is that sense of community? I mean, how is because football is so much an in-person game. You talked about all those the different operational pieces that come together. I mean, it's all that's geared around face to face. I mean, and putting that final
Absolutely.
product on the field. So, how has that sense of community been amongst the team and the players?
Yeah, I mean, before Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype, I think it would have been a massive issue. But just like we're having a conversation now, our positions get together, side of ball get together, the full team get together. It hasn't really felt too different from a meeting standpoint. It's obviously the side conversations and the chit chat in between meals and meetings that you really miss, and just kind of being around everybody in a personal way.
Sure. And I give the coaches a lot of credit, trying to bring in those different elements too, and just try to
Definitely
to keep things going. So how, shifting gears a little bit, the leadership, talking about that leadership on the football team, where, in your opinion, how important is leadership to a football program? And where does that leadership come from, or the most effective leadership come from?
Yeah, I don't think it's too different from other organizations. I think leadership in any organization is extremely important. The leadership and the leader and the leadership team sets the tone. They cultivate the environment, and with the right structure, can really allow people to do their best work. I love the analogy in the book Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, where he likens the leader to kind of the gardener as opposed to the all-knowing chess master. The best leaders, they delegate responsibility, they empower their teams, they allow people to grow within their roles. And with the latter example, the chess master, I think that type of leader can really inhibit growth by hiring for a role and then saying, do this exactly like this. And if each person has autonomy and purpose and are engaged, they'll find better ways to do things, but be more energized and excited each day. And I don't think it's much different with a football team. I think the leader can, empower the players to be engaged and get them excited each day, to come to work each day.
So do you think that leadership, from the coaches, from the staff, how do you balance that leadership with, the student leaders and the player leaders that you have? I mean, how critical is that the balance of those different sources of leadership to the success of the team?
I think a huge part of it is just being on the same page. The best head coaches I've been around have consistent messaging, consistent structure and protocols. And when, it's a really good sign when the players in interviews start to kind of mimic the coach and say the same thing as the coaches. So if you're just making sure everyone's on the same page and moving in the right direction, it usually has pretty good results.
So how does that leadership then translate to on-field success? What do you think is more critical to the outcome of the football game? Is it the leadership or is it the talent on the field?
Yeah. First, I think there'd be some very rich men and women if anyone really knew the answer to that. But from my research, I think it's pretty clear that you need both the athletic talent and effective leadership to succeed. To slightly modify a quote from Bill Belichick, I think player talent kind of sets the floor, and then the leadership, the culture, the character sets the ceiling. I do not believe that a team of extremely talented players who all do their own thing in their own direction could consistently win much. But then again, obviously plays have to be made on the field, and there's a level of talent needed to succeed for sure. If there's a great culture and leadership, then there's no doubt that more talented players certainly helps that as well.
That's great insight. So that really kind of speaks to that quote you modeled. So you need a certain amount of talent to be able to hang and to be able to compete. But no, that leadership. Is it fair to say that leadership helps in that sustained ability to win?
Definitely. I think that's what takes it to kind of the short term. It's easy to catch lightning in a bottle. But as players come and go, I should say, a great sign of the team, you see this with all the great dynasties, as players come and go and the success stays at that high level. I think that's a great sign.
No, that's some great insight. Now, thank you. So kind of to bring these two things together. So your work experience has been at the collegiate level, across a couple of different organizations now. And the research that you did, your studies within the dynamics program, led you to a master's thesis focused on NFL team culture. Are the leadership needs different in the college ranks versus professional teams?
Yeah, I don't think they're different, but I certainly think that it's more important at the NFL level. Actually, I think there is a difference because of the much greater talent disparity in college football. You see, if you go back to the high school level, you see teams win with the fastest running back or the biggest running back who kind of just blows through people. At the college level, there's no doubt that Alabama and LSU have 30 first-round draft picks per year. There's no doubt that those teams would be able to beat a lot of teams regardless of the culture. But a significant part of my research at the NFL level was looking to establish the fact, from a talent perspective at least, that those players are the cream of the crop. I make the simple observation that there's nearly 250 Division I teams across FBS and FCS. Each of those teams have 100-plus players. And even at that number of players, that's only a 4 or 5 year age range, really, across that whole population. Looking at the NFL, there's only 32 teams. 48 of them are able to dress on game day. And even moreover, that's 21-year-old guys to some who are in their 40s. That's a difference of thousands and thousands of players. And not to mention the number of D2 prospects and D3 prospects who make the NFL rosters. So once you acknowledge that there's a talent surplus, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that every team in the NFL has talented players, the best of the best available. Mm-hmm. You can safely assume that every team has guys who are fast enough, strong enough, big enough to do what's asked of them on the field. So now that we have that in mind, is it possible that the Patriots just had better players across the board every year for 20 straight years? When the Cleveland Browns had 20 quarterbacks in 20 years and couldn't find team success, could that be all of their faults? My hypothesis going into the research was that the on-field success is the visible symptom of so many other things. Most notably, I think my research kind of made me define the word talent a little bit differently than most. And I think more binary than most. And I think once players clear that floor and are talented enough to make an NFL roster, then player acquisition strategy, organizational culture, leadership, and character of the building, become serious difference makers.
So talk a little bit more about your definition of talent. What did your research tell you? How did that shape how you have come to define talent related to this research?
Sure. I mean, Tom Brady is probably the greatest quarterback of all time. I think that's safe to say. He was slow, average arm strength, below average athleticism, but he's obviously good enough to do those things at a level that's, easy to succeed in the NFL because he's done it for 20 years. And most people out of college would have said he wasn't, quote unquote, talented. He was a 6th-round draft pick. But now that we see Tom Brady, now that we see all the data points, what do we know? He's the most competitive person on earth. He's a great decision maker. He's smart. He's an accurate passer. He has a personality that people rally around. He works hard. He's selfless. He has a team first attitude. And I think it kind of goes back to that point of qualify the talent and then select based on all those other attributes.
So how does an NFL team determine whether or not a player has those attributes?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Is the diagnostic methods? I think you're allowed to interview. The teams spend thousands of hours interviewing prospects, all their superiors, their teammates. You hear stories about people going into, interview the custodians in the building and the lunch ladies, and kind of you start to collect data points and you put the full picture together.
And are you happy now to see that Brady's no longer in the AFC East?
I could certainly say that. As we said before, I grew up a Jets fan as a child, and I watched him win that division many, many, many times. But I also went to the University of Michigan, so I certainly root for Tom Brady, and cannot be a bigger fan of him right now in Tampa.
Oh, that's right. I missed that connection. I mean, he's been in the league so long, you forget where he went to.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I'm a big fan.
So coaches sometimes make that jump from collegiate success to the NFL and the coaching ranks. And, by and large, you could probably name on one hand those that have been able to make that jump and have that sustained success in the NFL ranks versus in college. What is it that you think those that have been able to find that success and been able to sustain that, what is it you think has enabled them to make that transition?
Yeah, I think it's personally, my opinion is I think it's those that are able to build a culture as opposed to, just win with X's and O's. I think Cliff Kingsbury right now in Arizona is kind of the exception to the rule, where he's, a quarterback guru and he's an offensive genius. And, he got that translated when he got that level of the traditional definition of talent. But then you look at guys like Matt Rule, who went from Temple to Baylor and now are doing pretty well in year one in the NFL. And I look across the coaches in the NFL, and they're guys like Belichick and John Harbaugh and Mike Tomlin. And those guys are kind of the culture builders. And, they don't really call plays. And obviously, don't get me wrong, they're NFL, football geniuses. But I look at the guys who are able to build the culture as people who succeed for sure.
So let's talk about that culture piece that you mentioned. I mean, is there what did you find as you were doing your research, and your studies? Is there anything that jumped out at you from a dynamics perspective that you noticed that, hey, these are organizational principles that some of these coaches are putting into place right now that are helping, enabling that culture that you talked about? I mean, any particular schools of thought or things that tend to be more successful in a football environment?
Yeah. When I went through my research and the data, I love the quote I came across: anybody can win once. And that to me is really, really great. Because like I said before, it's certainly possible to catch lightning in a bottle and have a once in a generation talent. And I think it's absolutely possible to win in the short term based on a number of different factors. But from my research, looking at the most successful longer term dynasties, a key component is really the match between the owner, the general manager, the head coach, and the veteran players. Being on the same page with what the expectations are is a must. And I think a key piece of that is patience from the owner and an explicit understanding that these are the types of people we need to bring into the building. In the OD program, we read Good to Great by Jim Collins. Mm-hmm. And his thing is, it's about getting the right people on the bus. And the truth is, there in the NFL, there may be a top pick or a successful player who may have to be skipped over or traded or cut. And that's really hard to do when it's a short-term step back to take a long-term view. And in my opinion, it goes back to that concept of getting the right people on the bus who are smart, selfless, motivated, disciplined, tough, etc. And if you're not those things, I'm not sure I'd want you on my team.
So it kind of speaks to what you're saying earlier, that there's that balance, right? Like, and if you all things equal, if everybody in the NFL, you can agree, okay, they have talent. They wouldn't be there if they didn't have a superior level of talent to be able to transcend the 25,000 plus people active in the college football ranks. So, you've got that talent. Now it's about that right fit and being able to put that right fit within the right culture. So I totally get now what the analogy that the gardener versus the chess leader. So
sure.
Is it fair to say, so, would you consider some of those that you mentioned, the cultural gurus, the Belichicks, the Tomlins, the Harbaughs, where would you put them? Would you put them in the gardener camp or in the chess player camp?
I think certainly the gardener camp. In the book Team of Teams, I think he makes a great point that, as you ascend to a leadership role, as you're able to make more decisions, you should actually make less decisions. And I look at those guys as, they have coordinators on each side of the ball that call the plays. I don't think they're micromanaging in the X's and O's. The humility of John Harbaugh to draft Lamar Jackson and then completely change the offense. I'm sure he had very strong opinions for how to run your team and how to call plays. But for him to let the coordinator kind of drop the new offense, for him to allow that offense to be, molded to the talent they got, I think speaks wonders to kind of that delegation and trusting your people to do what they do.
Yeah, I think that's a power. I want to repeat that thing that you said. So as you're able to make more decisions, you should actually make less.
Yeah.
No, I think
that's from Team of Teams. Highly recommended book.
Yeah. No, and I think that really speaks to that culture and that empowering, vibe. Like, just because you have the power to make the decisions doesn't mean that, hey, it would have worked out great for Harbaugh had that guy in Kansas City not had a unbelievable season also.
Absolutely.
But so are there any from drawing back on the dynamics experience, right? Are there any other leaders that you can point to? You mentioned good to great, and the theories there about getting the right people on the bus. Are there what other non-sports leaders best support some of the theories that you were able to really uncover and kind of formulate as you were working through your thesis?
Yeah, to start, I'd like to actually start with the sports leaders. Okay. And that was a huge part of my research. And I think the easiest one, the shining example is Bill Belichick in New England. We've seen him build a true dynasty over 2 decades, to be honest, with guys who are considered too small or too weak or too slow. They're a great team of good players, and they really embody the idea that you're building a team, not just collecting the best players. And that's kind of the guidepost in my research. And my observation is in New England, they know exactly what they're looking for. They don't try to fit a square peg into a round hole. I love the analogy of a Swiss Army knife he uses. And a Swiss Army knife is a below average knife, a below average toothpick, a below average scissor, all in one. And they've mastered that idea of specialization. They have 3 different running backs who do very different things. Mm-hmm. If there's an outside linebacker who's a great pass rusher, but the experts say he'll be a later round pick because he can't drop into pass coverage, he doesn't change direction that well. Well, I say, and they've said, take him and use him to rush the passer. Do what he does. And I think that's certainly a huge piece of it. To go to the non-sports examples, I love the story actually from Professor Hart's class about Ben Bernanke. He arrived at 3 a.m. for an emergency meeting when he was the chair of the Federal Reserve. The meeting was literally to save the economy. And he had a revelation when he arrived. The floors were clean, the coffee was made, the boardroom was set, and they were able to get to work without distraction. And later he made a speech to thousands of people who work for the Fed, across the whole United States, and said, even to the custodians and the assistants and the secretaries, never underestimate that your work is important to the national economy. And I think that's such an awesome piece to really empower and excite your workers. And then similarly, we heard the story of John F. Kennedy. He toured NASA during the space race, and he ran into a custodian on the floor of NASA and asked the gentleman what he did there at NASA. And the gentleman replied, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And that, to me, is such an amazing story. And of course, football is different. You do need that physical talent we spoke about earlier. But in a system like the NFL, where there's so much structure, there's things like the reverse order college draft, restricted free agency. The NFL is completely designed for parity. So once you have that talent, giving everyone in the building purpose and autonomy and excitement to work hard towards a shared goal is in my opinion, really how you take it to the next level.
And I think you see that in some organizations and their appreciation. You hear stories about folks in, the bus drivers getting championship rings. I remember that a couple of years ago when the Eagles won, they were talking about that, and the bus driver's been there forever. And it was like, well, he's the guy that gets them from the team hotel to the games and fires them up.
Absolutely.
Like they couldn't have done it without him. Like that's
absolutely.
So it kind of speaks to what you said, that there's everybody that touches the team in some way has impact.
And then one day, the bus is outside the stadium, and a normal bus driver, they have a flat tire. He waits, he calls someone. That bus driver, I'm part of the Eagles. I'm going to go change that tire. I'm going to go, it gives them the autonomy to take that next step. And when picture a whole organization of people doing that, when each person grows within their role and is excited to get better, the sum of all parts really, really improves the whole.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So what do you think? What's the next step for you as a football executive? Let's say an NFL team calls in the spring and says, "Hey, Jake, we're gonna give you the keys." What are your first steps?
Wow, first steps as a GM. First of all, this research is far from complete. I truly love learning and reading and applying new experiences. So truthfully, my true short-term and long-term goals are to never stop learning and researching and reading. But that being said, if you're giving me the keys, there's quantitative part of my research that gave some good tangible insights based on data. It's proven that an increase in the total number of draft picks correlates with a higher winning percentage over time. Scouting and drafting is so hard, as we know, and there's so many misses, and it's such an inexact science that some more picks is really just playing the odds that more will work out. The data shows that an increase in draft picks increases the chance of making the playoffs 3 years later. On top of that, the data shows that first round selections, although they contribute the most to their teams, actually have a disproportionate amount of risk based on their cost and the opportunity cost of that asset. So depending on the team needs and available prospects, there's a high chance I'd trade a draft slot away for either select young players or a bundle of second and third round picks. Based on certain individuals' character traits, there's a chance I'd trade a high cost player to diversify the risk and opportunity. As far as the structure and the process, I'd potentially lessen the amount of layers of management, create a more collaborative team environment. But other than that, sorry.
Well, so let's stick with that thought for a second. Are you concerned with, in an environment as structured as the NFL, if you lessen the layers of management, are you concerned with potentially losing some of the control over the direction of the team?
No, because I think I would be part of the team. I think it'd be on the team. When I say lessen the layers of management, there's a bunch of area scouts that go and collect data and have their own opinions. They're the ones that know these prospects the closest. And then they give their input, write their reports. And then it's, the GM by himself making picks. Of course, there are director level positions and assistant director level positions. But the more research I did, the more in all fields, that collaborative team environment fixes so much, and it really allows, objective, critical evaluation to rise to the top. And when everyone's free to give their own opinion, when the leader is allowing everyone to give their own opinion, I think there's invaluable benefits. And I'm not saying I would change really the structure or the process. I think you absolutely build the draft board based on the same traditional definitions of talent that we spoke about: size, speed, strength, burst, explosion, change of direction, flexibility, all that stuff. I think you allow the coaches and scouts to do what they do and what they've always done. You let the coaches and scouts really make their own evaluations. But from there, I'd really stress the importance of the other characteristics we spoke about. So once you establish that top group of guys at each position, you acknowledge that these are the group of guys who are talented enough to make an NFL roster. These are the group of guys who are able to do what we need them to do. Then let's take the ones who are the smartest, toughest, most selfless, disciplined, motivated of the bunch. And, the only way that will work is if everybody's on the same page. If there's an understanding from the owner and coaches that we may pass over a prospect, who ran 0.03 of a second faster in a straight line in shorts inside with no pads in April, or a different guy who may have, lifted a heavy metal bar 35 times instead of 26 times. And I think just what I meant by collaborative team environment is just getting all the people that have the information in the same room and then giving everyone the autonomy and the power to give their opinion.
So how do you balance that, right? And that's a perfect storm scenario where you have everybody's on the same page. You
Right.
get the guys that you want. How do you balance that then with the additional pressures that come upon high-profile teams, either high-profile in the college ranks or high-profile in the pros, where then you've got all the expectations of the fan base on top of, look, and you've got, in some cases, millions of armchair quarterbacks, over-analyzing. So how do you balance, you get all the guys that you want, but then maybe things aren't working out so well on the field as you had envisioned, or somebody goes down. I mean, it happens, unfortunately, almost every day, it seems, with just could be a random practice injury. How do you then navigate when the seas get rough?
Yeah, I mean, trust the process. It's hard, to ignore that stuff. I certainly listen to sports talk radio myself. I hear it about other teams. I think the key thing is getting the owner on board, getting that understanding and that explicit understanding that we may pass over people that people want. We may have to cut a great player. But the more you get the right people in the room, and that includes backups and depth, and, if that backup player may be a 5th round pick, which is a less than a coin toss in most years, you should be able to rest safely knowing that player is smart enough, tough enough, disciplined enough to work hard and be prepared when the opportunity comes. It's hard to do, and I'm not sure if I would, certainly be able to do it, but you get the people, the decision makers on board, and patience is certainly a key part of it.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share, from the research that we maybe haven't had the chance to talk about yet? Anything else that really struck you as you were, kind of building your theories and analyzing the research on, what it takes for that sustainable success in the NFL?
No, I think going through my research, the first part was that quantitative stuff and, what are the most efficient ways to actually build and acquire players. I looked at the NFL draft and free agency. There are certainly patterns and past data that correlate with better moves. So I think those are things that are kind of easy to implement. I think the next part is once you get the players in the building, it's exactly that development we talked about, and really making sure the character traits are, what you're looking for. And the hard part, like we said before, is if it's not, you got to get the right guys on the bus.
It's a big part of it. You've got to, it takes that that right combination of people, from the players all the way up through the leaders and everybody else in the organization.
Absolutely. An interesting part now hit me was like, I tried to find opportunities where you could involve players in the process. We talk so much in the organizational dynamic community about co-production and co-creation, and maybe it's you invite veteran players, into some of the draft meetings, and you say, what is this guy like as a teammate? Maybe you find players who on Monday with the coordinator for the next week, where they sit in and say, hey, these plays really work. So an interesting part that I don't really have the conclusion to is how you can give that sense of ownership to the players in not just on the field stuff, but in the building and creating the environment and culture.
I love that idea that how do you make it almost goes right back to that JFK example you gave with the janitor, right? Like you've got
exactly.
He's the janitor, but he's working to put a man on the moon. So getting those players invested in that too, and then having them feel as though they're part of that system, and it's just from a different layer outside of just the on the field production. That's some powerful stuff. So I do want to one of the things that we started off with in season 2 was to add in our rapid fire questions. So I want to ask you a series of questions. Now, I already promised they weren't, this is going to air in Philadelphia. I wasn't going to ask you about Doug Peterson or anything in the Eagles, because that's not fair. So I'm not going to do that. But I am going to ask you 6 other questions, and this is top of the mind stuff. So I want you to, just fire back with the first thing that you think of. So question number 1, you ready for these?
I'm ready. Let me have it.
All right. So what is one thing you would most like to do in your life that you haven't yet done?
Travel to every place in the world.
Travel? What's that?
You're right.
So, all right. So I'm gonna build on that though. You said travel.
Okay.
You've got money's no object. The airport's just opened up. You're traveling to where first?
That's a good question. I'm going to backtrack a little bit. In March of 2019, I don't know if you know this, the Penn football full team, 150 total people, we actually went to China for a spring break in 2019, and we played a game in Shanghai. We flew into Beijing and out of Shanghai. That, to me, really opened my eyes. I probably wouldn't have said that before that I needed to travel, or it's certainly not an itch I needed to scratch, but the different cultures and the different animals and type of culture really opened my eyes. So from there, I'm going to say maybe Greece.
Greece. All right. I didn't see that coming. You said China. I'm thinking somewhere in Asia, and you pulled a curveball.
No,
I love it.
Just somewhere beautiful.
Nice. So, all right, question number 2. So, in your opinion, what's one thing the world needs right now?
Perspective. I think everything we have, really the only thing we have is our perspective and how we were raised and how we see the world. And such a key piece of the organizational dynamics program for me was about how so much of it from a leadership perspective is about changing your perspective and seeing things from, other people's eyes and taking the 360-degree view. And I think if a lot of people in this world were able to see things from another person's perspective, it would help a lot.
Okay. So question 3, if you were back in school today, thinking about starting a career, what would you want to be when you grow up?
I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to say the long-term, audacious career goal is to be the GM of an NFL team. I think I would get into the leadership, organizational, management consulting stuff a little bit earlier. I wasn't too knowledgeable or aware until I started the OD program. But it's something that I truly enjoy and am passionate now, and taking that stuff and mixing it in the sports world couldn't be a better opportunity.
Great. All right. Number 4, what hobby or activity outside of your work brings you joy?
Right now, I'm going to say golf. I'm on a little bit of a golf kick.
Okay. Question number 5. What person, living or past, has inspired you the most?
I'm going to be boring again. I'm going to say Bill Belichick.
All right. Now, I didn't ask you any Eagles questions to try and help.
Yeah.
And so I can't help you with all the Belichick references. I mean, that's your own doing. But I'm not passing any judgment. I think that's a great example. But I'd be remiss if I let that slip as an Eagles fan. But
absolutely.
All right. So last question. What is the last thing you read?
The last book I read was called The Richest Man in Babylon, and is about acquiring personal wealth.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Jake. I've been talking today with Jake Stern, Director of Operations for Penn Quakers football here in Philadelphia. Jake's thesis, Building a Winning NFL Roster, Best Practices for Sustained Success, is available on the Scholarly Commons within the Penn Online Library, and the link's provided here in the bio. Jake, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed the conversation.
And special thanks to our technical producer, Dan Shields. I'm Zach Davis with Learning Aloud, a podcast for the organizational dynamics community at the University of Pennsylvania.